Hey, just a quick note to let you know that this video is a pre-recorded live event. If you'd like to join our upcoming events, such as demos and office hours, you can check out our schedule on our support page. Hope you find this video helpful and look forward to seeing you in our next event. Okay, thanks to those joining today's demo live, and welcome to any of you watching this video at a later date. In today's demo, I'm going to be talking about behaviors. You can track a lot of different types of behaviors using ZooMonitor. And it's really important that you set up those behaviors correctly to be able to answer your questions. So before we jump into ZooMonitor and start with the demo today, I'm actually going to do a little bit more background on that and briefly talk about behaviors. So in behavior sampling, there's generally categorized as two types of behaviors, and that's based on the duration of the behavior. So one of those types of behaviors is called an event behavior. And so these are relatively brief behaviors. You can think of things like social interactions, certainly other types of behaviors like that. My mind is completely blank of any other brief behavior there. Like scratching, certainly might be a brief behavior there. Any sort of elimination type behaviors are very brief. So different types of behaviors, very short, brief moments in time. And that's an event behavior. Opposite to that, the other type of behavior is called a state behavior. And so state behaviors are relatively longer duration behaviors. Think your things like inactive and locomotor behaviors, for instance, feeding, foraging behaviors, those types of behaviors. So why are we talking about events and states? It's important to first think about your behaviors in your ethogram in the lens of that categorization of events and states, because you'll use that when determining the most appropriate recording method. And so in ZooMonitor, there's 3 different recording methods available for you to be able to record the behaviors, the different methodologies there. The first one that I'll introduce here is continuous. And so continuous recording, as we call it in ZooMonitor, that is you're recording basically the full duration of time of a behavior. So you'll start recording it, and then when they do something else, you'll either stop that behavior or start another behavior, and you'll have an exact record of how much time they were performing that behavior. So you'll have a duration in seconds. This type of recording method, continuous recording, can be really helpful for typically those state behaviors. And you can also use it for events. Obviously, the duration of time of your events is going to be relatively short, but you'll have that record that behavior occurred, and you'll be able to look at that if you want as a frequency or a rate or any other type of sampling there, or any other type of metric. So that's continuous recording. You're recording a full record of what happened. And that is generally considered the gold standard because you're getting that exact replica of the behavior pattern. The challenge is that you're having to constantly record any change that the animal is doing. You're having to constantly update that. So it is a lot more intensive of a recording method compared to the next 2 I'll introduce. And so as an alternative to continuous, a lot of different people will also use a combination of 2 other sampling methods, which kind of give you some of the value of continuous, but a little bit lower effort from your observers. And so those other 2 are all occurrence recording and interval recording. And so all occurrence recording, you are recording basically that it's like a check mark. Think of like a check mark. You're tallying how many times the behavior occurred. So if you see the behavior, you're taking that little check mark, you're recording that it happened, and that's it. And so you'll have, from that data, you'll have a frequency, how many times did that behavior occur, and then you can then convert that into a rate of how many times did it occur by some unit of time. So number of occurrences per minute or per hour, for instance. And so that's your all occurrence recording. The other one that I mentioned there is interval recording. And so with interval, you are recording at predetermined time points. So for us at Lincoln Park Zoo, a lot of our sampling, we do 10-minute observations, and we record interval, we use interval recording to record behaviors at 1-minute intervals. So every 1 minute, you'll be recording what that animal's doing. And think of like a camera shutter snapshot. That's what you're doing when you're doing interval recording. In ZooMonitor, the app will beep when that interval occurs, and then you'll take that snapshot exactly at that moment in time of what the animal is doing. And another term for this is instantaneous point sampling, and you can see how that term instantaneous point sampling obviously is referring to that type of recording. So all occurrence and interval are a nice combination of using both of those because they kind of address different things when you're thinking about event and state behaviors. So with all occurrence, that is obviously really good for your event behaviors. So anytime those brief, rare event behaviors occur, you'll be making that tally. You'll have that perfect record of how many times it occurred. And you might not really be too worried about how much time were they performing that behavior. Just how many times did it happen? That's more the question there with all occurrence recording. For interval recording, that's a little bit different. So there you're only recording at that specific moment in time. And that's obviously going to be much more tailored to capturing those state behaviors. Because if one of those event behaviors that you're interested in didn't happen at that specific moment in time of when your interval occurred, you wouldn't be recording it. So it can really underrepresent the number of times that your event behaviors occurred. And it's really for capturing more of an approximate amount of time animals are performing different behaviors, which is a lot more appropriate for your state behaviors, those longer duration behaviors. So that's a good reason why you might want to consider combining all occurrence and interval, because they each kind of help address the drawbacks of the other method there. And like I said, in continuous certainly can do both of those, but at a much more high intensive effort for your observers. Okay, so with all that background, now let's go ahead and jump into ZooMonitor and we can look at some of the behaviors and how they're set up in the app. Okay, here we are in ZooMonitor, and we're right now in the app. And so what I was going to do is pull up a project here that has all three types of recording methods that I just mentioned set up on it, so we can kind of see the difference in how you record those behaviors and how that looks different in the app. So currently, right now in Chicago, it's about 30 degrees and snowing or freezing rain behind me. And so I'll put 30, and then our crowd size, I'm sitting here by myself. All right, let's go ahead and start the session. We're just gonna do this fake session here with Annie, one of our pygmy hippos at Lincoln Park Zoo. Okay, so here's the recording screen in ZooMonitor. This is where all the behaviors that you're recording will be displayed for you to do your observations. And what you're seeing right here, just to orient you off the top, everything is kind of organized in rows here. So at the top, you'll see some of the information here to end session, how much time is remaining on the session. So this is a 5-minute session. We have the intervals occurring, it looks like every 30 seconds. And so with that screen flash, that's our first interval. So with the interval sampling, when that happened, we would be taking that snapshot. And then the behaviors, so this first row here is where all of your individual animals will be. We just have Annie that we selected to do this observation. And then each of these rows here are the behaviors we have set up. And then there is this map at the bottom. And so each of these is called a channel. And that's a really important term in ZooMonitor. There we go. Because it's really important to understand what is a channel. Channels are the groupings of behaviors, mutually exclusive groupings of behaviors. So for instance, if we're talking about for the pygmy hippos, the depth in the habitat. So are they on land, or are they submerged in the water, or are they partially submerged, or are they at the surface? That whole thing there is one channel, and these are three behaviors within that channel. So when you're setting up the project, you'll first create a channel, and then you will add behaviors within that channel. And you can see on this project here, we have a channel for all occurrence behaviors turned on. You can only create one all occurrence channel, and that's because it's not mutually exclusive behaviors here. You can record any of these things. With these other channels, so this one is a continuous channel here for depth, and then these are interval channels down here, and then this is a map that is also an interval channel. With these, you are only recording one behavior at a time. So for instance, let's say Annie is on land. we'll click land. So now a timer started with the continuous recording, and it's going to keep recording that amount of time until I click something else. So if I click partially submerged, it's going to stop that bout of recording land, and now it's going to start recording partially submerged, and then you can jump to submerged. And you'll see the tile will stay highlighted here, and that's continuous recording. And you'll see over here it'll say stop behavior. That's another way for you to tell it's a continuous recording, and you can click stop behavior there. So that's continuous. All occurrence, it's very simple. You just click it and you'll see it'll tally and keep tallying that number up. So as many times as I click this, it'll keep adding that behavior there. And then with interval behavior, you'll be recording at those specific time points. So let's say when that screen flashed, let's say we were watching Annie and she was inactive. So you can click that. And then you can get an option of having modifiers here. So in this case, we have two modifiers, alert and rest. So let's say Annie is alert. And then we can plot where she's at. And if we want, we can also plot that she's on land. So I have in this project, I have depth being scored as both interval and continuous. That's purely for demonstration purposes. You would not be setting up your project like that as you would be recording it. You wouldn't need that type of redundancy there. And you can see once that interval ended and the next interval started, it cleared off what happened before, and you can record for the new interval. So it doesn't do that for continuous. So I'll keep continuous highlighted here. Let's say Annie's still on land. But on this next interval, we're going to score that she is locomoting and on land. And we'll go ahead and plot that on the map. So when that happened, we can score that she was locomoting. We can put that she was on land, and we can plot where she was at on the map. And so this down here, this is interval sampling for the space use data. This is a map that we developed at Lincoln Park Zoo. If you're interested in how we make the maps, I have a separate demo video on our YouTube channel about how to use an online tool called Pixlr to be able to make habitat maps. So this started with a blueprint, and then we had some edits to get it to this point. And so this is a top-down view of looking at the hippo habitat. This is where the guest's path curls around, and this is underwater viewing for the guests. And then we have two sides of the habitat here. And so a couple other things just to point out here on the recording screen, these little dots, if you're wondering what those are, you can pull up definitions. So if you want, you can add definitions into the project, and then any of your observers can pull that up when they're recording data so they can be confident that they know how to describe a behavior. Okay, and when the observation ended there, you'll see everything is now inactive, deactivated here. So you could just click save and you could be done that session. However, that last time it flashed, that's the last interval for your observation. So please remember to go ahead, click your animal again, and click the behavior. So let's say at that last flash, let's say Annie stopped walking around. Let's say she was inactive. We can say that she was inactive. We can put her as alert. We can say that she's still up on land, and we can plot her over here. Let's say she walked over a little bit. And you can see it's allowing us to record that. If I tried to record continuous right now, it's going to tell me no. Don't do that, Jason. If I tried to record one of the all occurrence behaviors, no, don't do that. So you can't record all occurrence and continuous behaviors after the session ends. And that's by design. That's because for both of those behaviors, that metric you're using, you need to know how much time you watched the animal to accurately calculate those metrics. So for the all occurrence behaviors, you're going to have that rate, how many times it occurs. So the jabber jawing there, we have in this fake demo session that it occurred 4 times. If that's 4 times out of 10 minutes, that's a different rate than if it's 4 times out of 12 minutes or 4 times out of 15 or 20 minutes. And so that's why it's really important to know how much time that the observation session was. And that's why that gets locked at the end of the observation. And then same thing for continuous. If you recorded, let's say 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes of land with our 5-minute observation, that would be 50% of the time that they were on land. However, if that was not a 5-minute observation, if that was a 10-minute or so forth, that percentage would be different. So you'd need to know how long the observation was to accurately calculate those metrics. And so that's it. That's the recording screen there. That's how you would record those behaviors in ZooMonitor. And I will show here really quick with this modifier, this example here, we only have one modifier here. We have one that I set up. I have it called alertness. It's just that rest and alert for inactive. You can set up multiple modifiers here. You can have up to 3 behavior modifiers. And it's important to recognize that each of these, rest and alert, those aren't individually their own behavior modifier. This whole category is considered a behavior modifier, right? So when I say you can have 3 modifiers, I'm not saying you can only add one more choice here and then you're done. You can add alertness, let's say rest and alert. You could add posture if you wanted. So we're recording it just as inactive, but if you wanted to also record posture and have that detail available to you when you analyze your data, you could add another modifier here for posture. And so you could have choices of like standing, sitting, lying, for instance. And then if you wanted, let's say you could have another modifier. Let's say you were interested in how much time are they looking towards guests or towards the visitor viewing area. You could have another modifier on there that's oriented towards visitors or something of that nature, and record that there. And so that would be 3 separate modifiers in that example there that you would be able to set up. And you are limited to only being able to add those 3 separate modifiers. But you do have, like I said, a lot of flexibility. You can add a lot of different choices within each of those modifiers. And these modifiers too, just to point out, are a little different than the behaviors here. So if I were to click one of these behaviors, you see it's going to change between the different behaviors because you can only have one behavior scored at a time for interval sampling. That's one of the bases of how this recording and sampling methods work for interval sampling and for that instantaneous point sampling. Same term. That's different here for modifiers. For modifiers, these are not mutually exclusive. If you want, you could click multiple ones. In this example, rest and alert are 100% mutually exclusive. You're not going to be resting and alert at the same time. So that doesn't apply for this, but you could have other examples where you set this up and you might need your observer to score multiple choices here at once. Let's say you had a feeding foraging behavior and you wanted to add a modifier for what was the food item that they were manipulating or consuming, and an animal might have multiple food items. They might have a few different pieces of like lettuce in their hand and then have something else in their other hand. And so very much thinking like a primate there, maybe some bias. And so you can have all those different food items here as a modifier and then have your observers click each of those that apply. So just to be clear, modifiers are not mutually exclusive like the channels are for the interval recording there and for the continuous. It's the same sort of thing. And then the other type of modifier you can have here is a social modifier. So let me pull that up. Let's say on that last interval, Annie was performing a social behavior. So I clicked the social behavior here, social, and then I have a social modifier here. And so this is something that you'll see when we go in and look at the project. This is basically just a toggle that you turn on. All the other modifiers, you have to specify all of those choices. So alert and rest, those are choices that I manually configured and wrote in. For a social modifier, when you turn that on, you don't have to go in and specify every animal on your project. If you turn on that social modifier, it'll automatically include every animal that's been added to your project. So you'll see Howie and Pogo are 2 other pygmy hippos that have been added to this project, and both of them are going to show up. If for a specific scenario, let's say you are observing and working with a species that's in more of a fission-fusion type of social system there, you might have your group membership, your group composition, your social group is going to change maybe on a per observation basis. And so here, that could get a little messy, right? You might have, let's say you're watching chimpanzees, you might have 20 chimps added to your project, but the group is only maybe 10 chimps at once, and different groups, other groups might be separated from that focal group that you're watching there. And so how to handle that, there is a way that we've built in to handle that too. So by default, you're going to see all 20 chimps showing up here. However, let's go ahead and save this session. I can show you how to adjust for that. So if that is a scenario, if you do have a fission fusion type of social situation, what you can do, so this here is just selecting who your focal animal is. So on that last session, we were just watching Annie. So I just have Annie selected. What you can do in that situation with fission fusion and your group composition changes, and you want to adjust your behavior modifiers, your social modifiers, apologies, you can go into this adjust session settings, and then in this specify social group, click that, and it'll give you all of the animals there. And you can just say, let's say Howie is no longer part of the social group, so you can deselect him. So if I were to hit close, and I just have Annie and Pogo, and I will fast forward this. Okay, so if you had gone in and you had deselected Pogo, or deselected Howie as not part of the group, when we click this social behavior here, you'll see that the social modifier is now adjusted to only including Pogo. Howie is not shown here as one of the modifier choices. So that's an easy way. It's not recording anything when you adjust your social group. It's not tracking that information in ZooMonitor for your observation. You'd have to do that separately through some combination of questions. But this is helping you if you do need your observers you want them to only see the list of animals in the group at the time of your observation. You can modify that. Okay, let's go ahead and now jump into admin and look at the project here. So we are going to Pygmy Hippo demo. And so you can see I have this project set up as 5 minutes. For those focal subjects, you can see I have Annie, Howie, Pogo. Habitat maps, I have that one map that you saw, that top-down view of the Pygmy Hippo habitat. And then the behaviors tab is where you're going to be setting up all those behaviors. So this is the really important tab to go through here. So there's all occurrence, interval, and continuous. So each of these is a separate tab. So you can click those and set up those behaviors relevant to each of those different sampling methods there. And so for instance, with all occurrence, if you want an all occurrence channel, all you have to do is toggle this on, this recording channel off on. When you toggle it on, then you can add these behaviors. And so you'll see I had these couple behaviors here that I added to the project. General comment, jabberjawing, threat display, and muck spreading. Interval and continuous is a little bit different. You have to, because as you saw with, like, for instance, the interval behavior, you can have multiple channels set up on a project, and same thing for continuous. You can have multiple channels set up on that project as well. In that example I just went through, there was 2 channels set up. If you remember, there was interval behavior and there was depth. So both of those channels are set up. So the first thing you do here in interval and continuous is you first create that recording channel. And so you'll see that button here, create recording channel. When you click that, it'll just ask you to input a name for the recording channel. So in these examples, I have interval behavior and depth. Remember, this is not the name of your behavior. This is the name of your channel, which is your grouping for those types of behaviors. And then you'll select a subject type. So interval or individual or group are the two different types of subjects in ZooMonitor. And so for our Pygmy Hippos, we are scoring those as an individual. You could also, if you were scoring a group sampled animal, you could have that as a group. And so once you create that recording channel, you'll see it show up in this table here of active channels. You can have inactive channels here. So let's say I have interval height. That's a channel I deactivated here, and you can toggle between those right there. And then I'll click interval behavior there. And once I click that, you'll see it'll open up into that channel. It's now saying channel name, interval behavior, channel subjects, all, and then it's listing all of those behaviors right there. And so this is where you're adding the behaviors. So if you're thinking about those behaviors like the inactive and feeding foraging, this is where you'll do it. You'll click create behavior, and this is where this pop-up window that you see here on the screen, this is where you're setting up all of your behavior information. So you first give it a behavior name, not a surprise there. So let's say we have, I'm just going to call it demo behavior because I'm not feeling particularly creative today. And then you can, and I'll come back to this in a second, you can set up a description. So you can set up a definition here. So if you do have your definition of your behavior, you saw I pulled that up in the app when we were recording for one of the behaviors by clicking the little ellipse. That's what you would be adding here. So in this description field is the definition. You can also set up, if you have little snippets of videos of your behaviors, you can add them here as well. They wouldn't be able to view those snippets for training purposes. They wouldn't be able to view those when they're recording the session. They would be able to view those, however, before they start the session on that initial screen there. And I can jump back into the app and show you where those live. There's also subgrouping. So in that example I went through earlier, we didn't have any subgroupings. However, subgroupings are really important to understand. So you can see a lot of different flexibility here in ZooMonitor. With subgroupings, what these are is basically, I mentioned earlier, those behaviors within a channel. You have multiple tiles within that channel, right? Multiple behaviors that'll show up as those tiles. If you have, let's say, an ethogram that has, I don't know, 30 to 40 behaviors, right? We certainly do at Lincoln Park Zoo. For some of our species, we have a lot of different behaviors defined on our ethogram. What that means then is that row of tiles there is going to be 30 to 40 tiles wide. And so you're going to have to do a lot of scrolling left and right to get the behavior that you're looking for. And so a way to address that is you can also break up that channel into multiple rows using these subgroup names here. So for instance, you could, let's say you could take your full ethogram and you could split it by, let's say, solitary behaviors and social behaviors. So if we wanted to do that, hypothetically, we would go up inactive. Let's say inactive behavior. That is a solitary behavior. What you would do is you would type solitary in here. So pretty simple. Then you'd click save. And then for feeding foraging, that's another solitary behavior. So you would go in and type in the same thing right here. The key here is it needs to be the same exact spelling. If I were to add like one extra trailing space at the end there, that's going to show up as a different subgroup. So just make sure that you are consistent with the subgroup names that you're typing in there. So I'll click save. Jump back to our channel here. And I was saying we're going to split it by solitary and social. So in social, we only have this one behavior. So here is where you would type in social. And you can see it is actually, there's a column here for subgroup 2. And the reason for this is this makes it easy if you are using subgroups and you're, minorly misspelling one subgroup and wondering why it's showing up on a different line in the recording screen. You can go back and you can just double check it here and you can see all the subgroups listed. So here, in theory, what we would be doing is editing locomotion, other solitary, undesirable, and adding that solitary subgroup in there. And then for other and not visible, we can have those as an other category or put them in solitary, whichever we want to do. And so what this would do is, like I said, on the recording screen, there's now going to be one row for your solitary behaviors and a separate row for your social behaviors. That rule of mutually exclusive, you're only scoring one behavior within that channel at that interval, still applies. So if you were to click one behavior up on the top row for a solitary behavior, if you were to then click something on the lower row for a social behavior, it's going to deactivate that first behavior and score that social behavior. So you're still recording the same exact way as if you didn't have subgroups set up. All it is doing is visually segmenting those behavior tiles across multiple rows on your screen. And that's really purely just to help you if you have a very long ethogram, you can break it up and be able to see all those behaviors a little bit easier. So a little bit more vertical scrolling, a little less horizontal scrolling for your observers. So that is the subgrouping there. Behavior modifiers, I've already kind of talked through that when we were recording the behavior. So you can see we have the 3 behavior modifiers here that are possible. And on this behavior for inactive, we only had this one set up, alertness. And we had those 2 choices, rest, head down, and alert, head up. And the key is when you enter these, you have to separate it by a comma. If you have a leading space here, ZooMonitor automatically pulls that out. So you don't need to worry about having it like that. like that is just fine as well. But if I wanted to enter another choice, we had rest alert, and let's say limbo. They're in between rest and alert. You just put comma and you would type in whatever that third choice may be. And so that's how you specify the modifier choices here. You do it through a comma separated list there. And like I said, if you were doing the second one, let's say we just had, for example, we had posture, it would look something like that. And for that other example I mentioned, if we were this is very hypothetical. We do not record any behavior like this in Lincoln Park Zoo. But if you had that, alertness to guess, you could have some sort of choice like that. So it's very easy to set up these modifiers. The one thing I'll note too here is the modifier name, alertness to guess. You can just leave it blank if you don't really care. That is only showing up in that row in the recording screen when you're setting up, when you're recording the behavior, you'll see what that name of that modifier is on that pop-up window there. That's not being tracked, and that's not coming out in your exported data there. So that's completely optional field there. These are obviously not optional. These are the modifiers that you are looking to record. And then the last one here, the last pane to look at is the additional modifier. So in additional modifiers, this is where that social modifier lives that I showed earlier that we scored for Annie, where we had Pogo and Howie showing up. And so like I said, all you have to do to turn on, to have that modifier show up on a behavior is just toggle this on. So you'll probably want to do that for your social behavior so you can track who's doing the behavior. One other thing for your social behaviors that you'll typically use a modifier for that I didn't on this project is initiator or recipient. A lot of times that's really important. So you can put in actor. A lot of times there might be a need for an unsure category there. So you can have, I just called it actor as the category name, and then our choices are initiator, recipient, unsure. And so that behavior modifier would now show up anytime you click social. You can say whether they were the initiator, and then because we have this turned on, you can click who that interaction was with, that social interaction. And so that's most of recording the behaviors here. The one thing I did skip over here is this not visible behavior. And so we do have not visible scored on this project. I don't have it checked. Jason, what are you doing? You should have it checked. Let me go ahead and check it now. And I'm going to hit save. And so what you see there is that pop-up message saying existing data, if applicable, will be processed as % of time visible and available in your reports in 1 hour. What does that mean? So muck spreading, that's not what I'm opening. Go ahead and open that not visible behavior again. So by default, if I didn't have that checked, the way that ZooMonitor would calculate this data is all of the data for this channel would be a % of time. And the way that gets calculated is how many intervals occurred out of the total number of intervals, right? And you have a percentage. So let's say inactive, let's say we had 10 intervals, inactive occurred on all 10 of them, that's 100%. Let's say on another observation, we had 5 intervals inactive, but then the hippo was not visible, was behind the scenes for the other 5 intervals there. So 5 of the 10, the % of time, would be 50% of that time the animal was inactive, 50% not visible. In some situations, it is important and helpful to adjust by the time visible. And so you calculate something called % of time visible by adjusting for that. And that might be a situation where you might have changes in visibility throughout the year. Let's say you're a northern zoo, you have seasonal visibility changes. Animals might be more visible in the summer than they are in the winter. And when you're looking at the amount of time that they spent in a behavior, it could be hard to compare between those different seasons because an animal is going to be more visible. So in theory, they might be doing that behavior more. That doesn't mean, though, in the winter, when you couldn't see the animal, that they weren't doing that behavior. They could have been doing it, just could have been doing it behind the scenes, or you might not have been able to see them. So any of those situations where you have visibility changes, maybe systematically throughout the year, or possibly by condition if you're doing some sort of research study, it can be helpful to have that percent of time visible metric. When you check this not visible behavior, what this does is it tells ZooMonitor, this is your not visible behavior. We can't calculate percent of time visible without knowing which is the behavior we're adjusting by. And so what this does now is for all of the interval data there, it's going to give you two metrics. It's going to still give you your percent of time. So for instance, that example with the 5 intervals inactive, 5 not visible, you'll still have 50% of time inactive, 50% of time not visible. However, it'll also calculate a percent of visible time, and in which case in that example, 100% of time inactive was the percent of time visible, because you only had those 5 intervals of inactive, and then the other 5 were not visible. So those 5 not visible get excluded from the calculation. So it's 5 divided by 5, which is 100% of visible time they were inactive. And so you have these two metrics that get calculated then when you check this box, when you check that box there. And you can use that percent of time visible, and you can decide when you're running the reports which one you want to use. You can calculate your report using percent of time or percent of visible time, but only when you check this box. ZooMonitor does take some time to calculate that, especially if you have like years and years of data that you've been using ZooMonitor, and now you want to go back and tell ZooMonitor, hey, these are the not visible behaviors. You can do that at any point. However, do expect ZooMonitor will take a little bit of time there to calculate that full percent of visible time data set for your project there. So that was the message there, saying that they'll be available in under 1 hour. Okay, let me go ahead. I think the last thing that I mentioned that I didn't circle back to yet is where videos can be shown here. So let me see if we have, I do have a video on this behavior here. So this is our inactive behavior, not the most exciting video here, but you see I have it added to this behavior. So I went to upload previously, I added in this video here, and you can see the video showing up here. Riveting. Okay, so that is an inactive pygmy hippo. And if you want to see that in the app, so if you want that to be available to your observers to see what that is, inactive, probably not the most important one. You can do that before recording your session. So let's jump back to the app really quick here. I'll go to continue. I will go into this project again. And from this screen here, before you click a new session, that is where they could view that behavior. So if I click view ethogram, you'll see it'll list out all of the different channels here on the project. This is a bug here showing an extra all occurrence channel that does not exist. And then what we can do is I can open up this interval behavior here, and you can see there's a button there to click that, and then we can play that behavior. And so you can see I have added video clips, snippets there to a few different behaviors. So any of the observers recording data on our pygmy hippos can pull this up and view this. These are only available when you have Wi-Fi access, when the device is online, because these are not being downloaded and stored in the app that you're recording on, so you don't have offline access with that. If we did that, then we would be maxing out the storage capacities of our devices very quickly. So you will need to be online to be able to view these. So this might be best if maybe your observers get their tablets and they're reviewing what they need to know before they go out and do their observations. That's a good time and place for them to take a look at these videos if they have any questions there. Okay, so that was an overview there of how to set up behaviors, how to record behaviors in ZooMonitor. You can see that there's lots of different ways, lots of flexibility built into ZooMonitor for being able to capture the behaviors that you're interested in. So I hope you found this demo helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. All right, take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked that video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to be notified when we release more videos. If you have any questions about ZooMonitor, you can always feel free to contact us at ZooMonitor@lpzoo.org. Thanks.